Hero myth tells us about a superhuman being, a role model for emulation and admiration. It is one of the most ancient archetypal stories that is embedded in our collective unconscious. The Gilgamesh epic was written about the year 2100 BCE, a poetry from ancient Mesopotamia describing the journey of Uruk's superhuman king, who is two-thirds god. Gilgamesh is a mighty king who battles monsters and strives for immortality. The hero myth is prevalent in all major ancient societies, including Egypt, Greece, Africa, India, and Scandinavia. Although hero stories constantly portray the cultural differences of their individual environments, the universal blueprint that connects them all is very clear. As Joseph Campbell notes, throughout the inhabited world, in all times and in under every circumstance, the myths of men have flourished, and they have been the living inspiration of whatever else may have appeared out of the activities of the human body and mind. It would not be too much to say that myth is the secret opening through which the inexhaustible energies of the cosmos pour into human cultural manifestation. A monomyth is a universal framework developed by Campbell that describes the hero's journey. The hero's monomyth is a universal pattern that shows how an individual frees himself from the vicious circle of the Great Mother archetype. This is accomplished by descending to the underworld, where a hero slays a dragon or faces a difficulty that he must overcome. Erich Neumann interprets the dragon as a symbol of Ouroboros, who bites his tail, forming a circle. The process of ego affirmation in which an individual swims up from the depth of unconscious, symbolized by things like water, forest, and underworld, is essential for gaining an independence from the everlasting mother archetype. Now, Joseph Campbell outlines the three essential components of the voyage, which are universally observable across cultures. Before delving into the stages of the hero's journey, consider what Erich Neumann has to say about this. The stages of the hero myth have become constituent elements in the personal development of every individual. First, the departure. The hero or protagonist lives in the everyday world until he is summoned to go on an adventure in the narrative's departure section. The hero is hesitant to respond to the call, but is encouraged by a mentor figure. Remember how Athena helped Odysseus make difficult decisions, as it is the case with his son Telemachus, but with the help of Athena he manages to meet his obligations. Second, the initiation. The hero then crosses the threshold into an unknown or special world, where he undergoes duties or difficulties either alone or with the assistance of help. The hero eventually arrives at the innermost cave or the primary crisis of his quest, when he must go through the ordeal of defeating the principal obstacle or enemy, achieving apotheosis and receiving his reward, a treasure or elixir. Third, the return. After receiving his reward, the hero must return to the everyday world. He could be hunted down by the guardians of the special world, or he could be unwilling to get back and be rescued or forced to return by outside intervention. In the return section, the hero crosses the boundary between worlds once more, returning to the ordinary world with the treasure or elixir he found, which he can now utilize to help his fellow men. The hero himself undergoes a transformation. This describes the process through which consciousness gains control over the unconscious. Consider the following example. Odysseus escaped from the island where he was trapped with the nymph Calypso, experiencing unending bodily delights. While reading Odysseus, the name of the island he was trapped in seemed suggestive of something, so I looked up the etymology of the word. The name of the island was Ogygia, which is related to the Ogygian deluge and the mythological person Ogyges, in the sense that the word Ogygian means primeval, primal, and at first light, implying that Homer's Ogygia was a primeval island. After liberating himself from the nymph commanded by Athena, who symbolizes the waking consciousness, he has to deal with the ocean's angry waves, representing a struggle with unconscious powers. He's almost drowned, but subsequently the ocean spits him out on the shore after a long struggle. Odysseus found himself awakening from sleep, from unconsciousness to consciousness, on the rescuing shore, on the new brink where literally with firm ground under his feet, he could look back on the sea, the ever-wavering Psyche. Only after this finding of himself he could exclaim the words which moves us even today, M. This is analogous to Jesus walking on water after subduing nature's forces by stopping the hurricane, symbolizing Christianity's aggressive and scornful attitude towards everything emanating from unconscious Ouroboros powers, such as infinite comfort and boundless pleasure. Christ survives a shipwreck and is able to walk on the water, With this deed, he overcomes the depth of chaos and is entitled to say, not "I am Christ," but "I am the light of the world." Despite the fact that the hero myth represents a universal archetypal pattern that transcends cultural boundaries, we can nevertheless see a reflection of the relevant cultural environment in each hero narrative. In addition to revealing the content of our collective unconscious, heroes from different cultures and eras also reveal their unique socio-cultural pathos, values, issues, difficulties, customs, history, and simply a zeitgeist. The Gilgamesh epic teaches us not only about the humanity's innate fear of death, but also of Mesopotamia's cultural characteristics. For example, Gilgamesh carving out his toils on a stone exemplifies Mesopotamia's development of writing. Furthermore, the Gilgamesh epic shows fascinating aspects of Mesopotamian polytheism and their perspective towards God's role in human affairs, gender divisions that exist in their culture, and so forth. The heroes in the Iliad not only tell us about the history of the Trojan War, which was later confirmed by Erich Schliemann, but also about the values of early Greek and late Roman societies. The poem was written at a time when Mycenaean civilization was in decline as a result of the Dorian Greek invasion. The social unrest and conflict of the era made a strong defensive community necessary. Consequently, it led to a culture that was dependent on the warrior class. In Homeric culture, arete indicated the strength and skill of a warrior or athlete, and above all, his heroic courage. Along with fighting prowess, arete possessed a bright mind and eloquence. Achilles is a great representation of a strong warrior which the civilization desperately needed. Homer's Odyssey tells us about family values, as represented by Odysseus' refusal to stay with the most beautiful nymph, who promised immortality and a blissful life, in order to return to his wife and son. The necessity of appropriate burial and belief in the afterlife is emphasized by Elepnor's disturbed spirit, who is promised by Odysseus to be buried properly. The value of hospitality is demonstrated by the extravagant presents that Telemachus receives from the kingdoms which he visits in search of information about his missing father. Now let us look at Western civilization, as German philosopher Oswald Spengler refers to it as Faustian, which he believes was born in 8th century. Spengler refers to Western society as Faustian because of what he considers to be the primary symbol of Western culture, namely infinite space. This is reflected by the West's desire to explore, examine, reshape the universe to fulfill its willpower and achieve omniscience, as Faust wagered his soul with Mephistopheles in order to obtain every inch of experience that world could have offered, even if it meant moral downfall. As previously stated, each hero embodies the quirks of their respective cultural surroundings, which naturally leads me to examine the philosophical relevance of Hollywood heroes. Modern Hollywood heroes, in my opinion, reflect a synthesis of westernized Christian morals with German, Scandinavian pagan powers. Looking at old Western epics and sagas such as Nibelungenlied, Beowulf, and so on, reveals how Christianity clashed with German paganism, resulting in a fertile synthesis that gave birth to a new kind of hero. To discuss the philosophical significance of Deadpool and how he stands in relation to the usual narrative of what it means to be a hero, I must first briefly convey the Spenglerian idea of culture ontology. Culture, according to Oswald Spengler, is a living and metaphysically endowed stage of social formation, whose principal concerns are art, metaphysics, and spirituality. These three are always associated with popular cultural heroes of Greek, Nordic, Egyptian, and mythologies of other cultures. All of them had their unique place in a metaphysical outlook of their relevant cultures. They were depicted in art and sculpture, serving the function of meaning generators. On the other hand, Spengler sees civilization as a point at which culture dies and transforms into a stuffed, huge behemoth that is infertile and impotent, no longer capable of producing quality, and hence is largely oriented towards quantity. In other words, culture becomes civilization when its prime symbol and cultural achievements are exhausted. In contrast to culture, the fundamental concerns of civilization become economics, politics, and money. For Spengler, the man of civilization who lives in a megalopolis is unspiritual, cynical, irreligious, unphilosophical, merciless, incessantly pursuing practical accomplishments, and devoid of traditional virtues left over from the bygone age. According to Spengler, culture has a lifespan of 1,000 years and is divided into seasonal cycles: spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Spring. Culture is born with its defining prime symbol and foundational principles. Hero myth is of utmost importance. Creativity is in its zenith. Chivalry and religious ideas, along with deeply spiritual God-feeling, are primary. Culture is rural, and consciousness is in a heavy dream state. Summer. Consciousness is ripening. Urban lifestyle begins to emerge. Traditions and values are clear. Metaphysical dome of the culture is formed and protects society from the danger of meaning crisis. Highest art forms have been achieved. Rationalism and mysticism struggle with each other, leading to creativity. Autumn. Culture begins to question its primary values and traditions. Intellectualism and rationalism start to overtake. Clear shift from rural to urban lifestyle. Metaphysics start to break down, exposing society to the coldness of infinite nature. Winter, a stage of cultural death, when culture transforms into a civilization, characterized with giant metropolitan formations. Megalopolis becomes the primary center of action. Culture has already exhausted its creativity. Religion and traditions are dead. Humans are materialistic and valueless. Economic concerns are primary. According to Spengler, the West transformed into civilization from 19th to 20th century. Every facet of being is impacted by the transition from culture to civilization, including politics, philosophy, arts, and the economy. And now I reach the central problem of my video essay, which attempts to investigate how civilization, through its way of thinking, alters the conventional hero narrative. In other words, if the heroes of times when cultures are born, being the archetypal forerunners of mankind in general, are endowed with all noble qualities, undergoing aforementioned universal stages of overcoming, then what is the hero of a civilization, namely when culture is about to die? What does the hero look like when culture is in the state of agony? The traditional Hollywood superhero movies replicate the old pattern of the hero's journey, while also incorporating Christian morality, such as aiding the poor, fighting crime, protecting human lives, being responsible and such. They often imitate Christ's following characteristics. Resisting temptation, remembering that Jesus was tempted by Satan. This parallels with Batman and Joker as his tempter. Spider-Man attempting to resist the dark force of Venom. Superman withholding his powers, and many others. Ancient heroes like Achilles are diametrically opposed to this practice. After killing his enemy, Achilles tied Hector's dead body to his chariot and dragged him around Troy in the vilest act of dishonor. As a result, he not only kills his rival but also disturbs the corpse. It is worth noting that Spider-Man never kills his enemies. Goblin dies from his blade in the first film, while Dr. Octopus drowns himself trying to save the city from tritium in Spider-Man 2. In the final third Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire, Peter Parker has no intention of killing Eddie Brock. He simply dies as a result of his own fault. But what's most important, Spider-Man shows higher reasoning faculties by not directing anger towards anti-heroes as such. He consciously recognized that Octopus is controlled by his tentacles and Brock by the symbiote, demonstrating the extenuation of consciousness of Spider-Man over his own unconscious instincts. Therefore, the contrast between Peter Parker, a hero, and villains of the sequel is clear. One has the Apollonian consciousness, which helps him to take control over his life, whereas villains are always gripped by transpersonal powers of unconscious, using them as temporary vehicles. This is reminiscent of my previous video about Mask, in that both the symbiote and the mask can be used by multiple hosts, as it is the case with Tentacles of Octopus, implying that villain is someone who lacks the ego consciousness. In Dark Knight, Batman is mocked by the Joker for his righteousness and higher ethical standards, but in the end he still refuses to kill the Joker. Superhero characters like religious figures are expected to be awe-inspiring, eliciting feelings of excitement and inspiration. They demonstrate wisdom through inspirational and philosophical utterances. And now we arrive at Deadpool. Deadpool of course echoes features of archetypal motifs. He is strong, powerful, moves into a new world after gaining regenerative powers, slays enemies, fights for the beloved, and endures a transformation. However, and this is a big however, all of those things are quite different, paradigmatically and qualitatively different. Deadpool as the anti-hero is in direct opposition to traditional superheroes. Wade Wilson is cynical, caustic, unpleasant, vulgar, and amoral to the extreme. Rather than inspiring viewers throughout the film, he typically incites laughter instead of awe or sadness. The move from inspirational and emotive heroic characters to funny characters is visible in other Marvel sequels, when heroes suddenly become funnier and acquire a heightened sense of humor. This shift from metaphysical seriousness to cynical comedy can now be viewed as a miniature model of the transition from culture to civilization. Nowadays, filmmakers strive to dazzle viewers with sheer magnitude and variety of special effects, since this is the only way left to captivate the audience. For instance, I think it is clear that Spider-Man 2's train fight scene is far more intense and engaging than current Marvel war scenes, which flood your brain with unending visuals and enhanced intensities in order to compensate for its creative exhaustion. This is a sign of civilization which concerns itself with outward rather than inward concerns. Inward has to do with the core elements of cultural prime symbols such as art and spirituality, whereas outward is concerned with conquering the external, being extensive and globalized, and putting emphasis on politics and money. Now let's get back to Wade. Before he becomes a superhero, he was not an awkward science student or just an average guy, but rather a dishonorable discharge and mercenary. His childhood problems are something that characterizes modern civilization, as it is the case with his wife's problems. Vanessa's father left her before she was born, a type of out-of-wedlock birth problem, similar to Wade Wilson. Both of them were molested and abused by their uncles and had a rough childhood. As a consequence, one ended up as a mercenary and the other as a sex worker in a hostile environment. When we compare this couple to Peter Parker and MJ, where one is a science student and the other is a singer, the contrast is quite striking. The characters in Deadpool are more marginalized and depict the realities of contemporary metropolitan civilization, which are typically absent from older superhero films that focus on daylight and Apollonian consciousness. Wade's childhood can be compared to Joker's, who tells a story of how his father left scars on his face, alluding to his rough childhood. The Venom series, in which a conventional villain is a protagonist, exemplifies the general trend of anti-hero types becoming increasingly prominent. Furthermore, Thanos, who is outstandingly an anti-hero, became fairly famous and garnered a large number of admirers in Infinity War, implying two things: the blurring of what makes someone a role model for others, as well as the eruption of all the personal traumas left behind in traditional superhero films. Now, Wade's overly sexualized relationship with Vanessa contrasts with the chivalry medieval attitude towards women seen in traditional superhero films, such as Spider-Man, Superman, and Batman. His sarcastic dark comedy style of humor makes up for his lack of inspiration in philosophical superhero wisdom. The savage and frightening manner in which he slays his enemies is also uncommon in superhero films, reminiscent of Achilles, whom I mentioned as an example of a pagan hero archetype. This is obviously different from the fighting style of classical Hollywood superheroes. Wade's amorality is demonstrated by the advice he gives to Dopinder, a taxi driver, in order to get his beloved Gita. Note that I use the term amoral rather than immoral, since the hero of civilization is not good or bad, nice or evil, but exists in a space where classical archetypal motifs are deconstructed, as it is the case with the plotline of Shrek, where every archetypal scenario is turned upside down. Wade now tells the taxi driver to murder his rival cousin Bandu and then kidnap the girl. His cynical approach that is recurrent in the movie shows how Wade Wilson is not a classical hero. Now, I'm well aware that I'm not making any discoveries here, so let's hear what Wade has to say about this himself.
Wait! You're my hero.
No. That I ain't.
Well, I think you are still a hero, albeit a new one. What's most intriguing is that we don't really need to compare Deadpool to other superheroes like Batman or Spider-Man, because we have a character named Colossus, who is the ultimate embodiment of traditional superhero. The stark contrast between Colossus and Deadpool is crucial to understanding the gradual development of a cultural hero into a civilizational hero. Colossus is a conservative, Russian Christian retrograde, out-of-date superhero with chivalric, polite, merciful, and virtuous qualities. Once again, a mix of Christian morals and pagan abilities. Note how conservative values are now associated with Russia, which actually is in no way justified, and I will address that in other video. Now, we see a pseudo-philosophical antagonism between the two throughout the film. The Colossus encourages Deadpool to become a traditional hero and join the X-Men. When the film comes to an end, when Deadpool has defeated his enemy and is about to murder him, the contrast between a cultural hero and a new hero of civilization reaches a climax. Colossus delivers an outdated Christian Spider-Man-like philosophical lecture about what defines a great hero. He talks about the importance of showing mercy and sparing an enemy, of having a moral high ground. And in that moment of Colossus's philosophical ecstasy, Deadpool shoots his opponent in the head, symbolizing the total rejection and transvaluation of classical hero attitude in the most vulgar way possible. The unpopularity and poor perception of Justice League, a disastrous movie, has now proved the decline and withering of traditional superheroes. Characters are far too serious, less humorous, moral, and so on. which of course has no impact on the audience anymore, and is most likely why the entire film was CGI. So overall, modern urban civilization is defined by cynicism and unrestrained mockery of classical virtues. This is why Deadpool is a hero of civilization rather than culture. The major themes in the film that I described, as well as the traits of the protagonist, are characteristic of a civilization which Spengler compares to the condition of a dying Roman Empire, a historical stage in which the megalopolis triumphs, resulting in the birth of the opposition between world city and province, in which the former triumphs and hegemonizes all around it. Cosmopolis mentality is demonstrably impersonal, with people displaying arrogance and contempt for traditional values and religion. Oswald Spengler compares current megacities and their societies to the Roman Empire. In Rome, for example, there were gigantic multi-story buildings known as insula. He compares them to modern skyscrapers, which he sees as a transition from quality to quantity. Skyscrapers are obviously larger and more stable, with help of better technology. But the point here is that the pathos that is behind skyscrapers and insula is one and the same. Furthermore, the primary concern of civilization is money, which becomes decisive in everything you do in the late phase of civilization. That is of course exactly what is happening in the entertainment industry. That is why the box office is the primary focus of modern filmmakers.
And that's the fear now, because you're now making movies for 16-year-olds and China. And that's it.
As a result, it explains why most modern superhero films are about quantity rather than quality, packed with superficial humor rather than something inspiring, which nowadays would definitely sound cringy. From now on, we'll either witness superhero movies that make us laugh or ones that dazzle us with their sheer scale and spectacularity. This really gives us the confidence to anticipate that the upcoming superhero films will be remakes of existing ones, with a focus on superficial, gargantuan scenes that guarantee larger earnings. Now let's summarize the video and contextualize Deadpool into the larger picture. As you were possibly put off by my loose association structure, which is actually a method and feature of viewing the world rather than a bug. The motifs of courage, responsibility, resisting the powers of the unconscious, and self-affirmation are universally recognizable in live, undead cultures. The pagan heroes lack Christian values and compassion. They are often cruel to their adversaries and are notorious for mercilessly punishing anyone who gets in their way. Now, in Western culture, we have a combination of Christianized pagan heroes, as typified by famous Hollywood superheroes. However, they were remnants of a living culture and are now being replaced with civilizational heroes. This is reminiscent of how sexual energy that was repressed by Christianity eventually broke out, as you can never actually get rid of something that has deep roots in the ever-present structure of our psyche. This resulted in a renewed interest in anti-hero types, as they become more prevalent over time. I choose Deadpool as the best example of this. The entire process by which the naive cultural hero evolves into the cynical, sarcastic anti-hero is now part of a larger systematic shift from daytime awareness and Apollonian order to the nighttime unconscious abyss that plagues the modern megalopolis. I also like how Deadpool possesses the regenerative powers reminiscent of Greek Lernaean Hydra, who is a serpentine water monster symbolizing the abysmal nighttime unconscious powers. Now, I want to make it clear that the analysis that I have presented is not value-driven, but rather an attempt to observe current tendencies objectively. Spengler, who was incorrectly cherished by radical political ideologues, did not believe that this process could ever be changed, and viewed it as the inevitable end of culture organism. And lastly, thank you for your support. I always appreciate your likes, comments, and subscriptions. If you want to further support the channel, you can become a Patreon, which will be much appreciated. The link will be in the description.